for the listeners, right? We talked about the moon, back in May. We had our third episode was about the moon, and for those people that might be thinking, well, why are we talking about the moon again? Because there's been a lot of developments in this space. Some of them that we talked to you about in May. We want to update you and bring you up to speed of what's changed and where we think this is going, and it's all new. It's going to be super exciting.
In a world defined by relentless innovation and geopolitical shifts, understanding what's truly next is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. This is RTX, the future. Your guides through tomorrow's complex landscape are two individuals with unparalleled insight. Jay Mazzelli, co-founder and CEO of Red Thread X, a retired Army colonel and a veteran leader in defense and technology innovation, brings decades of experience from the front lines of strategic development. Nate Platts, an active duty lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, actively shaping future capabilities through advanced data and strategic sustainment. Together, Jay and Nate offer a rare vantage point, having advised at the highest levels, navigated complex technological revolutions, and influenced the strategic implications of innovation long before they hit the mainstream. On RTX, the future, they cut through the noise to deliver the unvarnished truth about what's coming, why it matters, and what you can do about it. Stop guessing. Start knowing.
What's going on, Jay?
Hey Nate, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Had a great weekend, camping and hiking with the wife, and I'm ready to talk the moon.
That's awesome. And I just got to say, I'm really excited to talk about space and the cislunar economy with you because there is some crazy shit going on out there in space. Sorry.
That's a good one. There are, and for the listeners, right? We talked about the moon, back in May. We had our third episode was about the moon, and for those people that might be thinking, well, why are we talking about the moon again? Because there's been a lot of developments in this space. Some of them that we talked to you about in May. We want to update you and bring you up to speed of what's changed and where we think this is going, and it's all new. It's going to be super exciting.
Yeah. In fact, I'd like to start off with something that's personal for both of us. You and I had both signed up for T-Mobile's Starlink beta test as they were figuring out exactly what the parameters were going to be. And you and I both signed up for T-Mobile Starlink service.
That's right.
And, two very different circumstances. But while I was in Wyoming on my fishing trip, I had an injury. And I wound up needing help from the guy I was fishing with who was hundreds of yards away. Based on the injury, I couldn't get back across the river. And because of the T-Mobile Starlink system, I was able to send him a text. He got it through his emergency satellite notification and was able to come back, help me get across the river, and help me get down to the hospital to get the injury checked. So did it save my life? No. But was it pretty darn important in me getting timely medical care for an injury? Absolutely.
But it could have saved your life, right? T-Mobile's bringing cellular service, Starlink cellular service, to dead zones on the Earth. Similarly, my wife and I were backpacking from Crested Butte to Aspen, bucket list hike through one of the most beautiful areas in the U.S., if not the world. And I did not check my cell phone in terms of sending text messages, but every now and then I would look at it to see if I had satellite service. Could I send a text? Could I call for help? And I could, and that was, reassuring. And so why does this relate to the moon, right? Well, not only are we trying to expand our, reach to the dead zones of the Earth, but people are trying to connect the moon, right? No one is inhabiting the moon right now, but there are companies like Nokia and like iSpace that are putting cellular service on the moon to make sure that it's connected for when we potentially are connected there, either with autonomous plants or with humans that might be out there on extended stays.
And you're exactly right. It is not a matter of if, it is simply a matter of when. When we see manufacturing on the moon, when we see mining on the moon, when we see power generation on the moon, and when we see stationing on the moon, because NASA's already shown that it's going to be part of their launch plan as they eventually make the reach to Mars.
Yeah, and that's what this episode's called, The Race to Revenue, right? The revenue of the moon specifically, $1.8 trillion by 2035 is what this market is anticipated to be. It's a 9% growth annually over the next 10 years. It's pretty remarkable. Yeah. And so what else are we going to talk about, right? Lunar data centers, lunar connectivity, we kind of highlighted that. Lunar resources, which I'm super excited to get into. And, maybe we'll touch the end of this with some geopolitics. But I want to talk the lunar resources first. Let's talk about helium-3. We mentioned this in the podcast in May. We said, hey, this is going to be kind of important because helium-3, to remind our listeners, and for those that are listening for the first time, helium-3 is a very rare substance on Earth. And it is extremely valuable. I'll let you kind of hit on that, the price of that. But it is essential for quantum computing because it allows you to keep these computers at an exceptionally cool, temperature, which is required for these things to run. And you can't find it on the Earth, but it happens to be in abundance on the moon, right? And so what happened recently, Jay?
Yeah. So last week we teased it out just a little bit, but something historic occurred when the company Interloon, based in Seattle in the United States, signed a contract with the U.S. Department of Energy. First time ever that the Department of Energy has signed a contract for natural resources not harvested here on the Earth. So Interloon's business models, they're going to harvest helium-3 off of the moon and return it to the Earth, and they're going to be able to achieve a better market value through that over time. And they're claiming that they're going to do their first launch by the end of this year to start doing some of their spectral analysis and measurement on the south pole of the moon, where they will do presumably some of their initial mining. And to put this in perspective, helium-3, it is 7,400 liters per kilogram of helium-3. So that's how non-dense it is. A kilogram of helium-3 is worth approximately $20 million.
Wow, that is expensive. That is pricey. You can see where the economics comes in this, and people might be looking up Interloon right now and saying, well, they're only going to bring 3 liters back. The DOE only entered a contract in for 3 liters. That's hardly enough to cover the cost of sending a spaceship to the moon and back, but they're doing this as a proof of concept for a future plant that they want to have on the moon that is going to be able to do this at scale. And they just got an $18 million seed raise earlier this year. And $18 million for a seed raise is a lot for a seed raise. Typically, seed raises are maybe $1 million, maybe usually a couple $100,000. Yeah, $18 million seed raise. And so this is pretty exciting because if they're able to extract helium, not only is it the first instance of a private company providing resources to the U.S. government from an interstellar source, but it's the first time where we're, potentially getting materials not from the Earth, and that's pretty exciting.
Right. Well, and as part of the race to Q Day, helium-3 is vital to being able to provide the cooling necessary to run quantum computing. So this is going to have a huge impact on all of the topics we've talked about. Because we've talked about advanced computing, the advancements in AI, biotechnology, and everything else. That advanced computing is going to be contingent on getting helium-3 in the sufficient volume to run the quantum computing to get access to the qubits that we're going to need. What I think is also really interesting about this story with Interloon is that it's going to open an avenue to something that we've not yet seen except in science fiction, other than some deeds that say, hey, would you like to get an acre of the moon? We're actually going to see competition for real estate, a market emerge for the moon in terms of who's going to control what territory and what resources they place on the moon. And that's going to be a national and a industrial challenge.
Yeah, we talked about the laws governing space and the moon are the Wild West, and they were written in the 70s and 60s and haven't been visited since. And so I'm excited to see how that plays out, right? Especially when we identify, hey, the south pole of the moon is rich with helium-3. So who's going to lay claim to that, and how will that claim be adjudicated, satisfied, and then kept? I have no idea, but I'm excited to see this.
Well, that and it's going to be interesting to see too, because generally we sort of had this cognitive bias of thinking of the moon as the light side of the moon, but there's a second half that never sees the sun, and generally unexplored environment there as well. So there's going to be so many different things spiraling about the resources that are available on the moon and the jump off point it'll provide for the cislunar economy.
Yeah. And we talked about, kind of briefly touched about the connectivity on the moon and putting 5G on the moon. And people might be thinking, well, why would there need to be a 5G service on the moon? I know Nokia Bell is working on this, iSpace with KDDI. Well, 5G allows you to move data in large quantities, right? Think about how you use your 5G service to stream Netflix or to watch, the Super Bowl if you're traveling, or to download a movie or to do a video conference call. And if you are on the moon with, let's say, Interloon has their plant on the south side of the moon, and it needs to be controlled remotely. Well, if you can push 5G from the moon because it's a 5G service that's providing that data transfer to Earth, then you can push a lot of information back and forth, and you can do a lot more than just doing it by radio waves or doing it how it was done basically during the Apollo series.
Yeah, your comment hurts a little bit though, Nate, because I'm not sure I'm going to watch another Super Bowl until the 49ers figure out how to beat the Chiefs, because that's starting to get right there on the D of Iron Maiden. It's been a frustrating couple of years watching them lose. But in all seriousness, what's interesting is you talk about that wireless access and the data transference occurring on the surface of the moon. We're also seeing that increase in data services, wireless access, and data transmission between the Earth and between satellites in Earth orbit as well. So what's happened with Amazon and Kuiper lately?
So we talked T-Mobile, right, with our Starlink service. And Starlink, as you know, is a Elon Musk company where there's thousands of satellites up in space for it's called low Earth orbit. And that allows you to have Wi-Fi connectivity pretty much anywhere. And for a long time, it has been, the single source or almost a monopoly. Well, Amazon, through its Kuiper project, is entering that competitive space. And they did so in April with the release of 27 satellites. And they're looking to go to market and release that service later this year. So April, 27 satellites. How many do you think they've launched as of August?
I don't know, I'm assuming at least double, triple, maybe quadruple?
100 satellites. 100 satellites are in space for Amazon's Project Kuiper as of August. So it's a fourfold increase in 3.5 months. And that's pretty impressive. That shows you the scale and the urgency and the potential market as you see this. And so that's going to be a direct competitor, but also it's going to provide more and more options for us as consumers. And I think it's going to be pretty incredible.
And I think there's an interesting philosophical difference between Starlink's service basis and what Amazon is doing with the Kuiper project. Starlink clearly providing low Earth orbit down to terrestrial communications helped us both in our different circumstances. But what's interesting about the Kuiper design is it's a network laterally in space as much as it is terrestrial communications as well. So arguably, some of the sources I've seen are saying that it may wind up being an extension of Amazon Web Services, and not just to allow for greater access to buying things via an app or a website, but also in terms of the whole host of services they provide with AWS.
Yeah, and as AI becomes more and more prevalent, data that feeds AI is becoming more and more critical. It's kind of the currency, right, that makes it go. Or you could think of it as, the feedstock for the oil that runs your car. That's kind of how I look at data. If you can push that data, you kind of control, who has access to it, but you can also become a major player in a lot of different industries. And if they're able to push things laterally, that increases their coverage that they can have around the globe and on Earth, and potentially even what they can have beyond the Earth. Right, this is pretty exciting, and competition breeds some good innovation. So I'm excited to see these two behemoths dance. It should be pretty interesting.
It is going to be really exciting to watch. What I think is also equally fascinating is we're not only seeing these small satellites with these very specific purposes, satellite payloads that are communicating down with the Earth, like Starlink, or maybe communicating laterally and down to Earth with Kuiper, but also the larger satellites and payloads that are involved with things like manufacturing in space and the microgravity manufacturing opportunity that has really started to take off with some demonstrated successes there as well.
And let's talk about the satellites in space, right? 12,000-ish or so in space right now, by 2030. So in 5 years, that's projected to increase tenfold, 120,000 satellites. That's a lot of satellites. I mean, space is big, and the space around the Earth is also big, but 120,000 satellites, that causes a lot of different challenges in terms of how we exit the atmosphere, how we launch things up, what's going to come down, does it come down controlled, what does it look like in terms of our observations and our ability to see what's in outer space. This is a unique problem set, and I don't know how this looks in 15, 20 years if we're seeing a tenfold increase in just 5 years.
Yeah, I think it's going to cause any number of problems. I think some folks are potentially being dismissive about the space debris and I'll call it space clutter problems. Like you said, 120,000 satellites in orbit, while we're also trying to access the moon. We're trying to access beyond the moon. So we're going to have travel through Earth orbit to get to the cislunar economy, both directions as we start to harvest resources, put people on the moon and have the data exchanges and whatnot. So 120,000-ish satellites in orbit by the end of the decade. And therefore, increased risk of collision. You've already got debris, and there's certain thresholds of debris you can track, and then debris that's too small to track. And if there's a collision, you're going to get the exponential effect called the Kessler effect or the Kessler syndrome, where one collision creates a debris field that causes more collisions, and you get this rapid amplification of that. But I think one of the concerns I've got is it's easy to dismiss that and say, well, it's just going to be inexpensive satellite payloads for communications for Starlink or something like that. And I disagree, because not only do we still have manned space stations up there, like ISS and others, but we also have companies making major investments in manufacturing in the microgravity environment. So as an example, Varda Space, they were able to raise $187 million in a Series C. They are making drugs in space that you can't manufacture on Earth. Microgravity environment lets you get crystalline structures that you cannot get on Earth. So they're demonstrating, just like Interlude is demonstrating the value of harvesting helium on the moon to return to Earth, Varda is demonstrating the value of manufacturing these drugs and medicines in space and returning them. And I can't help but think that Varda is going to want to really, really carefully protect a space-based manufacturing system.
I was just thinking, what's the insurance plan for that? Like, hey, I have this lab in space. Okay, cool. The adjuster's like, there's 120,000 satellites that are free ranging across the environment. So what's the probability that you lose this multi-million-dollar laboratory with this, priceless prescription drug solution?
Yeah, and the revenue stream that would be in fact impacted by damage or loss of the satellite. And I'm gonna use a term that we're both familiar with. I don't think you can probably apply the big space little satellite model with 120,000 things in orbit.
I was thinking about that, big sky, little bullet theory, right? But it goes. There's a company that we know of, right, that's tracking this space debris for potential solutions and to solve this, right? And so, like, as we see more and more opportunity, more and more congestion, like, there's going to be options for people that are going to solve these problems, and they're going to be critical to solve if we're going to continue to do this, right?
Right. And those companies are going to be absolutely necessary for mitigating risk and helping us control this expanding space economy, because unfortunately, under the current zeitgeist, we are seeing things like funding cuts to NASA and loss of services. And some of their services are space-based services. Some of their services are oriented on supporting the Earth. But understandably, it's a direction that the country, specifically the U.S., is heading. But if we lose some of those services, it does create an opportunity for industry to come fill those voids with their services.
Yeah, I think Voyager just got a budget cut of about $120 million, I believe, right? And now there's other declarations of, hey, we're going to do this instead, right? There was the chief of NASA said they're going to, hey, we're going to Mars. We've got to get there. The moon's important, right? But it does leave open the door for private industry or for direct competitors. I think you mentioned the moon, and the territory on the moon is going to be interesting to see how that is competed for and how that is kind of declared, right? Well, similar to the moon, to the Earth, where real estate is everything, there are points in space that are more advantageous to be in than others, right? There's things called Lagrange points where you can put a satellite and it stays in relative gravitational equilibrium to the Earth. Without, what that means is you can have it sit there without having to burn energy or be in orbit or spend valuable resources like a fuel to have it sit in a point, and it just stays there. And if you can do that, let's say you put this lab, instead of orbit around the moon, you put it in a Lagrange point where it's going to be relatively stable. That's going to be pretty awesome. But with 120,000 things in space, those Lagrange points might be taken over, or declared ownership by a government because of the strategic value of that point.
And interestingly, at the same time, we're also seeing the increased application of AI and automation in space, with some companies proposing methods of assembling space stations or even extended range rockets in space, so minimizing your launch costs. So instead of sending a large payload on a single launch, send several small payloads, deploy those, and then have some sort of autonomous assembly occurring in space. And even some initial research towards AI piloting of spacecraft, which would be necessary as we start to look at some of the long range travel that may be a factor.
So here's another thing that's really cool: space-based energy, right? That's kind of a tongue twister. But China's Omega 2.0 project looks to collect solar energy and beam it to the Earth. So forget wireless energy, but taking solar energy from Earth and having it direct beam down to the Earth to provide, power that, cloud cover can't impact. That's pretty awesome. There's another one which I love is a Japanese company called Obayashi. The Obayashi Corporation is looking at, the carbon nanotube elevator, a space-based elevator. This has been talked about in sci-fi for a while. This has been theorized from other companies, but they're looking at a 96,000 kilometer nanotube elevator with a projected start date this year at a cost of over $7 billion, right? So why would you want a carbon tube elevator? Well, it's still relatively expensive to launch a rocket up into space. But if you could just elevate something like an elevator, that cost goes down. And I just read a great book series, The Three Body Problem. I know it's a Netflix series also, but this is one of the talks about, this invading, civilization called the Trisolaris. So the Trisolarans are afraid of the world getting a technology where they can do a space-based elevator because it allows us to exponentially grow our space footprint. And I think it's
really
interesting that it is, yes. That was one of the things they tried to sabotage was Earth's ability to have a nanotech space-based elevator. And we're reading about this company that's pushing forward to this because it is so critical, right? Science fiction obviously in many cases predicts what the future is going to look like. And I think this is a really prescient topic that they're like, hey, this is pretty important. So important that there's a company that's trying to do this year. And that'd be pretty awesome. I just think that that's kind of a full circle thing of things I've read in science fiction and I'm seeing, come to life pretty quickly.
And the fact that we're seeing the cost per kilogram of launch is coming down significantly. Markedly cheaper than in the past. But at the same time, it may be even more cost effective to have this 96,000 kilometer, basically space elevator. But then going back a topic, how in the world does that influence the orbital pathway around it? What is the safety buffer, if you would, around this space elevator that's going up to 96,000 kilometers and influencing several levels of Earth orbit and then the pathways for things that are going to be traversing through those orbits?
Yeah. I don't know. Plus with 120,000 satellites and space debris and everything, right? And it's...
Yeah, and is Japan asking to do it? Or, really the company, not the country. Is this company asking for permission to do this? Or are they just looking at this ungoverned space and saying, we're going to do this and figure it out?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the race to revenue, right? There's a lot going on right now in space and in the moon, as we kind of predicted and talked about in May. But it's faster than I think, at least I was anticipating, right? Like this is awesome to see, but where is it going, right? Like where does it stop? What's the next phase? It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I want to throw one last wild card in there too, and that is the effects of Mother Nature in space. And there's two things that, as we did our research and our analysis and our report writing, that really, really stand out. The first is we got closer to the sun than we ever have before with the NASA satellite payload, or NASA payload, And that Parker Solar Probe got within about 3 million miles of the sun and gave us information about solar weather effects that we've never had before. So we may actually be able to predict things. So this is a little bit of an inside Army joke, but for all the signal officers out there in the world who have said solar flares are why my radios didn't work, you might actually get a reprieve at some point in time and be able to say, hey, there's solar flares coming and your radios aren't going to work. And then we can at least know it's actually happening. But in all seriousness, the Parker Space Probe was able to measure solar effects at a level that we've never seen before, which should increase our ability to predict solar weather impacts in Earth orbit as well as on the planet itself. But then one thing really stands out that just caught my attention is like wow, is this going to be movies and science fiction becomes reality? So as the space race is occurring and we're building out the space economy and we're putting resources on the moon and we're potentially putting people on the moon and we're certainly putting autonomy and everything we've described, there's a 60 meter wide asteroid called asteroid YR4 that thankfully is going to miss the Earth. So let's be glad that in December 2032 it's not going to hit the Earth. But there's a really good likelihood it may hit the moon.
Wow.
And holy cow, what happens if a 60-meter wide asteroid hits the moon with all of this infrastructure in space and on the moon? That's be something that, as you talked about, what do the actuarial tables look like for space operations? Debris fields, Kessler syndrome, 120,000 satellites in space.
Yeah.
Asteroid crashing into the moon. It's completely ungoverned space right now, and it's going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up and say, where do we think this is going to end, or where do you think this is going? So I'm going to say, like, in this decade, right, in the 2020s, before we get to 2030, we're going to see the first drug manufactured in space. We're going to see the first autonomous construction of a larger object in space. So that's, the micro launches that you talked about with, agentic robots that are bringing something together to produce a larger structure. We're going to see the harvesting of minerals and extraterrestrial substance brought back from the moon by a private company for sale to a government, which I think is really exciting. And we're going to see a lot of satellites. I would not be surprised if that 120,000 is the low end of what we actually end up realizing with how fast this space is moving. And that's just what I can think of top of my head, right? There's more, but I'm excited to see where this goes. I think we'll be talking about it again.
I think we will. My principal takeaway is we're going to see not only a lot of investment of economic investment, we're going to see a lot of innovation, a lot of energy put into what, in my mind, is now going to become a two-way economy. So in essence, everything up to now has basically been one way. Earth, send a satellite up. Earth, send a space station up. Earth, go to the moon. Yeah, we recovered the astronauts and stuff like that. But like you described, drugs manufactured in space. What are we going to be able to do with things like microprocessors manufactured in a microgravity environment in terms of potentially stronger cellular structures or faster processing speeds? So I think, to me, the big takeaway is it's really, truly become a two-way economy now, with things going from Earth to space and things coming from space back that create a circular economy, and it's going to be great to watch play out.
Yeah, this is awesome. This has been a great discussion, Jay.
As always, Nate, and it really enjoyed it.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Until next week. Looking forward to it. Cheers.
All righty. Take care. I'll be seeing you.